The moment Melissa walked into that windowless fourth-floor conference room and saw Blake already seated, elbows on the table like he owned the patent to posture, she knew something rancid was about to drop. Todd had that fake priest energy again, like he was about to bless a firing with the grace of a HR-approved sermon. And sure enough, before her ass even hit the chair, he clapped his hands and said, "Good news. We're shaking things up." "Melissa," he continued, stretching her name like a yoga instructor trying to sound thoughtful, "the board's been talking about innovation, disruption, fresh ideas. You've done great work on the infrastructure alignment project, really, but we think it's time to bring in someone who can take it to the next level." That's when Blake leaned forward and said, "We're rebranding it as Project Nova." He was naming a tech startup, and not a duct-taped legacy system, barely holding together after 4 years of her blood, sweat, and bug fixes. Todd smiled like a Dollar Tree televangelist. "This'll be a great learning opportunity for you. You'll support Blake's transition as lead. Coach him up a bit. It's a team win." Melissa didn't blink. She didn't ask why Todd's nephew, whose most impressive achievement so far was a LinkedIn post about embracing failure, was being handed a project she'd bled for. She didn't rage or cry or slam her company-issued Lenovo shut. She just nodded and started saving things. The project roadmap, downloaded, risk register, updated and backed up twice. Her last 4 weekly reports that flagged the unresolved dependencies in the billing module, all forwarded to her personal Gmail with the subject line, "When it breaks." Even saved the team's Slack thread where Blake asked if data governance was just another name for cybersecurity. By the time she got back to her desk, she'd already created a new folder on her desktop, The Fall of Nova. "Hey, real quick, if this little tale of sabotage by nepotism has you hooked, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to hit my first 10,000 subscribers ever. Help a storyteller out before the next Boardroom backstab unfolds, yeah." Anyway, Blake spent his first week reimagining the vision. He created a Figma board full of buzzwords like synergy ecosystem and disruptive resilience. He cut 3 of the 5 QA testing sprints, because agile means agile, then scheduled a team brainstorm at 7:30 a.m. on a Monday to get ahead of the week's energy curve. Melissa watched him like a biologist, studying a particularly verbose frog. She answered every question he asked, never offered more than what was requested, and kept her tone steady and helpful. Not sweet, not warm, just pleasant, the kind of tone you use when you're calmly telling someone they're standing in quicksand. Todd would occasionally drop by her desk, smile like a man who thinks he's just defused a bomb, and say things like, "He's learning fast, huh?" She'd smile back, very fast. By Friday, Blake announced in a team-wide email that he'd simplified the pipeline architecture by eliminating the audit layer Melissa spent 6 months negotiating with compliance. The audit layer that prevented bad data from triggering mass refunds. The audit layer she'd named, documented, and guarded like a damn dragon. She opened the email. She read it twice. Then she added a new file to the Fall of Nova titled, "Removed Audit Layer Risk Memo." She timestamped it, attached the compliance approval doc. Then she replied, "All, thanks, Blake," just flagging that the audit layer was a key requirement from risk and compliance to meet SOX standards. "Let me know if we're engaging them for updated sign-off." Blake never replied. Todd sent her a private Slack that said, "No need to worry them with the small stuff. We're thinking big picture now." Melissa screenshot it, saved it, and said nothing. By the end of the week, Blake had scheduled a product showcase demo for investors. Melissa, meanwhile, started shopping for a USB drive, one big enough to carry the receipts. Blake strutted into Monday's stand-up, wearing a Patagonia vest like he'd just IPO'd a meditation app. "Let's talk moonshots," he said, pointing at the wall-mounted whiteboard with a Sharpie like it owed him money. "Q2 isn't just a goal, it's a revolution." Melissa watched from the back, sipping burnt coffee from her Ask Me About Regression testing mug. She counted 7 promises in the first 4 minutes. End-to-end platform integration by June, automated invoicing by July, AI-powered analytics, whatever that meant, by August, all without extending the budget, or the timeline, or reality. "Don't worry," Blake added, "we'll cut the fat. That means less red tape and more doing." Then he turned to Melissa, smiling like a golden retriever who just swallowed a sock. "Melissa, you'll help make sure the legacy stuff doesn't slow us down, yeah?" She smiled back, "Of course. I'll document any concerns as we go." That's how it began. with a tone that sounded cooperative, almost maternal. But underneath, Melissa had shifted. She wasn't just documenting anymore, she was curating, building a gallery of negligence. Every time Blake dismissed a warning, it went in the vault. Every missed benchmark, undocumented change, and compliance violation was saved with timestamps, original attachments, and a quiet little BCC to her personal Gmail. One afternoon, she flagged a core issue in the data reconciliation module. The patch Blake approved ignored legacy formatting rules, meaning when it hit production, any invoice with special characters, which was most international vendors, would either crash the process or miscalculate totals. Shouldn't we run this through full-cycle testing before launch? She asked during a planning session. Blake waved it off. Trust me, my guy at Startup Sync says iterative deployments are the way to go. Break stuff fast. Facebook said that in 2008. We're handling finance records. Exactly. Growth mindset. Melissa nodded, clicked her pen, and opened a fresh note titled Reconciliation Risk Known Issue approved by Blake 4/11. She included the Zoom call transcript, just in case. Later that day, Blake announced he was skipping the next compliance review, said the quarterly audit could be asynchronous. When Melissa gently reminded him that skipping it would breach policy, he chuckled and said, policies are just training wheels. We're in NASCAR now. She wrote that down too, verbatim. Behind closed doors, Todd continued playing defense. Let him stretch his wings, told her after she raised concerns in private. Blake's got instincts. He's just cutting through the bureaucracy you built. You mean the protocols that prevent fraud? Todd smiled like a used car salesman trying to sell you a lemon with a cracked windshield. He's young. Let's not box him in with pessimism. Melissa stared at him a second longer than polite. Then she went back to her desk and pulled up a copy of the compliance checklist from the original project charter. She sent it to Blake under the subject line, Historical Requirements, FYI. Then she BCC'd herself and saved it under Checklist Ignored Noncompliance Trail. She even kept a folder called What They Said VS, What They Did, inside Blake's town hall deck promising 99.9% uptime, and her JIRA ticket documenting the infrastructure team's warnings about the API limits he'd doubled without warning. By now, personal Gmail was starting to look like a digital crime scene. Everything color-coded, labeled, cross-referenced with Slack conversations, deck revisions, and project logs. Her team noticed too, not publicly, but in the subtle shift-in-the-chair kind of way. One developer met her. He told us to hotfix prod without rollback plan. Are we even documenting this? Melissa responded, always. Blake, meanwhile, was planning an innovation happy hour with kombucha on tap and a slide deck on the future of finance. Melissa declined the invite. She had more pressing work, sorting screenshots of his unapproved scope, changes into a subfolder called Death by Optimism. By the end of the week, 3 client tickets had been auto-closed without resolution because someone, likely Blake's new outsourced bug triage team, marked them not critical and involved a recurring charge error that had already cost a mid-size client $8,400. Melissa quietly escalated it in a reply all. Flagging this as unresolved, client is threatening to churn if it's not addressed by Monday. Blake replied, thanks, let's table this for Q3, bigger fish to fry, BCC, archive, filed under, client loss forecast red flag #7. She didn't argue, didn't warn him again. The storm was coming. Every cloud was tagged, indexed, and ZIP ready. The first real bug didn't just hit production. It bellaflopped into it like a drunk uncle at a 4th of July pool party. Invoice calculations across 3 major clients were off by a factor of 10. One vendor, an old client from the Midwest, with a reputation for not taking digital crap lightly, billed $197,000 for services that should have cost $19,700. Within hours, their head of ops sent an all-caps email titled, Explain this now. Melissa stared at the chaos unraveling in her inbox. Then she calmly opened a file from 2 weeks earlier, Risk Memo Reconciliation Error Potential. She'd flagged this exact failure mode, had noted it in the weekly report, had even brought it up in person on a Friday sync. She attached the memo and forwarded it to Todd with a subject line that simply read, as discussed 4/3. His reply came 7 minutes later, let's keep the energy positive. No blame game. Please stay off client calls while we reframe the issue. Appreciate your discretion. Melissa didn't reply. She just opened a new folder on her desktop. Audit Trail Master. She started moving files, tagged and sorted. Risk logs, ignored QA notes. Slack messages where her QA lead literally wrote, "This will blow up in prod if we bypass this check." Emails from Blake dismissing every concern with vague phrases like "that's a future problem" or "we'll pivot if needed." Clients began circling like sharks. One sent over a list of anomalies in billing and asked for a point of contact. Todd looped in Blake and sent Melissa a private Slack. Let Blake quarterback this. Too close to it emotionally. Emotionally. That word itched like fiberglass under her skin. Melissa wasn't emotional, she was surgical. She forwarded the list to herself, tagged it client escalation preventable, and moved on. The dev team was in quiet revolt. Bugs weren't being tracked properly. The staging environment was in shambles, and half the offshore testers Blake had hired on a whim still didn't have access credentials. Melissa flagged it all, in Jira, in email, private notes with screenshots of error logs timestamped and geotagged. And when no one responded again, she copied each record into her growing private archive. Her tone in meetings turned cool. Crisp, surgical. Blake would float another impossible goal. Let's get dynamic currency support in before next sprint. And she'd nod, jot it down, and write a parallel memo called Currency Scope Creep, Unbudgeted. Todd asked her to present a win story during the weekly team meeting. She smiled like a hostage blinking Morse code. "Of course," she said. "We shaved 2 seconds off average load time for the invoice page." "That's the spirit," he replied, like a man who just duct-taped a smoke alarm. Behind the scenes, Melissa was building a forensic tomb. ZIP folders with nested dependencies. Naming conventions that would make a litigator weep with joy. Every message, every Jira, every call transcript labeled, preserved, and quietly backed up to a secure cloud account under a fake project title, Almanac. Her frustration had calcified into something sharper, resolve. She wasn't here to save them anymore. That ship had hit the reef. She was here to make sure when the tide finally receded and the wreckage was undeniable, the black box would be hers. And it would be loud. And it would be clear. Midweek, Blake sent a chipper Slack to the team. "Let's not dwell on glitches. This is a transition moment. Let's ride the chaos rocket." Melissa took a screenshot. Saved it under delusional messaging 4/19. When another client reported issues with tax calculations in multi-region invoices, Blake sent a quick response. "That's a fringe case. Not mission critical." Except it was. Because that client's CFO had a reputation for calling CEOs directly. Melissa knew she used to prep his quarterly briefings. She didn't argue, she didn't even reply. She just opened a new subfolder in Audit Trail Master, ignored escalations client risk tier A. She was no longer part of the team, not in any real sense. She was the historian now, the ghost in the machine. And her job was simple: make sure the truth had a paper trail. One they couldn't shred when it all went sideways. They booked the demo like it was a coronation. Client, big logo. West Coast tech money with expansion plans and enough red flags to build a parade. But Todd wanted a win, and Blake wanted a headline. Melissa wasn't invited. Her name had been quietly omitted from the prep email. But the moment she saw Nova pilot demo, 11 o'clock a.m. PST pop onto the team calendar, she knew. The client logged in 5 minutes early. Blake greeted them like a man pitching a lifestyle brand, not an unstable billing engine duct-taped together with missed deadlines and misplaced decimal points. "We're excited to show you how Nova simplifies pricing tiers for international markets." He beamed, clicker in hand, deck full of pastel gradients and buzzwords like modular excellence and cost elasticity. Melissa, sitting across the building with her camera off and mic muted, watched the demo unfold in silence. She had the staging logs open in one window, risk register in another. The coffee in her mug had long gone cold. Everything was fine until it wasn't. Blake pulled up a test invoice for the demo. The system was supposed to calculate a bulk discount at 10,000 units. Instead, it applied a surcharge. A $12,400 surcharge. There was a pause. The kind of pause you feel in your teeth. One of the client's execs, a woman in a gray blazer who hadn't spoken yet, leaned into her webcam and said, "I'm sorry, is this pricing correct?" Blake laughed. "Oh, that's just a demo hiccup. The back end's still syncing." The client's CFO leaned forward. "That's not a sync issue, that's a tier logic failure. This surcharge implies the system penalizes high-volume orders." Another pause. Todd cut in, "Legacy code, folks. We're still untangling some of the old architecture. That's why we're bringing in fresh leadership." Melissa didn't move, didn't speak. Her jaw clenched so hard it squeaked. Legacy code. The words rang in her ears like a rusty bell. The module in question, the pricing tier engine, Melissa had built it 2 years ago, and Blake had ripped it out 6 weeks prior and replaced it with a no-sign-off upgrade based on a template he bought from a freelance dev he found on Discord. She had receipts. Literally. She opened her archive, found the original pricing spec document, highlighted the section marked Discount Logic for tiered volume purchases. Clear, precise, reviewed, approved by compliance, signed off by finance. Then she opened Blake's version, the one she'd quietly exported from Confluence before he deleted the original page. In his version, the discount logic was gone, replaced by a vague line, dynamic pricing to reflect demand pressure. She took a screenshot, attached both versions side by side in a PDF, added a timestamp, labeled it Pricing Module Tamper No Sign-Off Demo Failure Root Cause. Meanwhile, on the call, the client had gone quiet. The execs were muted. The CFO finally spoke. We'll circle back internally. Thank you for your time. Click, gone, just like that. 5 months of grooming that client wasted in 30 seconds. Todd didn't blink. Well, that could have gone better, he said, trying to keep the room light. He turned to the engineering lead on Slack and wrote, "We need to do a deep dive on Melissa's old code. This can't happen again." Melissa exhaled slowly, like a fuse burning down. She opened a blank document and wrote the words, "Gaslight attempt post demo blame for /24. She attached the Slack screenshot. Then she took out a printed copy of the original spec sheet. Yes, she still kept paper, and laid it flat on her desk. She stared at it, at the initials in the margins, at her own notes, at the signatures, at the sheer effort they were trying to bury under a narrative of convenient blame. Her fury didn't explode, it simmered, molten, slow, controlled. She didn't reply. Not to the Slack, not to the email thread. Instead, she opened Almanac, her private archive, and created a new folder, False Attribution Protocols. Inside it, she placed the original pricing module spec, the deleted Confluence page Blake, replaced the git commit, where his freelance fix was merged the calendar invite, showing she wasn't in the demo, the Slack message blaming her legacy code. She zipped the folder. Password protected it. Then she uploaded a copy to cold storage under a new alias. Red Nova, they thought the crash was a fluke. Melissa knew it was a preview. Melissa called in sick the Monday after the demo crash. No theatrics. No explanation beyond the standard taking a few days to recover. Truth was, she didn't need to recover. She needed distance. Needed to let the fire they lit smolder a little longer before she stopped pretending she wanted to put it out. While Todd scrambled to reframe the narrative for the failed demo, his phrase, not hers, Melissa spent her mornings walking, drinking black coffee by the river trail, sorting through the last 100 files she'd been saving like war bonds. Every document, every Slack thread, every discrepancy between what Blake promised and what the systems were actually capable of. By Wednesday, she had a tidy resignation letter drafted and dated. By Friday, it was sent. No drama, no fanfare, just a 2-sentence email with a subject line, "Notice of resignation effective immediately." Attached to it, polite note offering a 2-week transition if needed. Todd didn't even call. Instead, he replied 5 hours later with, "Thanks for your service and dedication, Melissa. Wishing you all the best in your next chapter." Translation, don't let the door hit you. Human resources set up the exit interview like it was a retirement tea party. Some intern with a headset and a checklist asked Melissa about her overall satisfaction, whether she felt the company culture was supportive of growth. She smiled through the entire thing, spoke kindly, even complimented the catered lunches. The intern ticked boxes like she was filling out a census. But on her last day, Melissa didn't bring cupcakes or make a farewell post on Slack. Instead, she walked in at 9:02, logged into her terminal one final time, and opened a secure email to the CTO. Subject line, "For when it breaks body. I wanted to leave with something more useful than cake." Attached is a summary of critical risk factors affecting Nova and its upcoming deployment cycle. This includes documented flags, altered specs, and non-compliant decisions made under the current leadership. The file name is self-explanatory. The file, a 600 MB encrypted ZIP archive labeled Breakless Nova Full Zip. Inside was the crown jewel of her quiet campaign, a folder-by-folder roadmap of every ignored warning, every misstep, and every shredded best practice dating back to Blake's first day. Color-coded, chronologically ordered, cross-referenced. It even had a changelog, one final gift before she erased her presence from the machine. At 4:56 p.m., Melissa powered down her laptop for the last time and placed it gently in the IT return bin. No one said goodbye. No one stopped her. Blake didn't notice. He was too busy prepping for Phase 2, some grand rollout he was pitching as a disruption milestone. She overheard him on a call as she walked past the war room on her way out. "We're pushing Nova Live across all domestic clients next month," he was saying, pacing like a TED talk reject. "I've got some insane buzz building. People are calling this a game changer." Melissa didn't stop, just nodded once at the security guard, scanned her badge out for the last time, and stepped into the elevator. She didn't smile until the doors closed. Then she did, not wide, not smug, but quiet, knowing she had left them everything they needed to avoid the collapse. And she knew, without a single doubt, they wouldn't read a word of it, not until the walls started shaking. It started with a missing shipment notification. One of their larger vendors, East Coast Distribution Hub with its own legal department and a reputation for zero tolerance, emailed a simple question: why weren't we paid for March? By the end of that Monday, a dozen more emails poured in from vendors across the supply chain. Invoices marked as settled were still showing unpaid on their ledgers. Internal reconciliation dashboards were frozen. Auto payments triggered multiple times, overdrawing smaller vendor accounts and flagging fraud alerts. Someone in finance tried to patch a payment loop manually and accidentally resent $72,000 to a vendor who had already received it and returned it last quarter. The bank flagged it. Legal got involved. That's when the alarms really started. The Nova rollout, Blake's big, legacy-crushing victory lap, had launched just 3 days earlier. It took less than 12 hours to start burning. Core issue? A background job that handled payment validation had been rewritten during the streamlining phase. The rewrite, led by Blake's outsourced code jockeys, ignored legacy logic that handled currency mismatches, duplicate vendor IDs, and historical payment holds. Melissa had flagged the risk twice, once in a weekly report, once in a private memo titled, "Auto Pay Rewrite Urgent Review Needed." Both were timestamped. Both were ignored. Now that logic gap had gone live. It was chewing through the vendor database like a blender full of glass. In the war room, Blake was panicking. Todd was stammering about growing pains. The CFO had gone pale after realizing millions in vendor payments had either failed or, worse, triggered unapproved late fees. By Tuesday morning, the emergency finance meeting was standing room only. Vendor contracts were being pulled from legal archives. Funds were being calculated manually on whiteboards. Someone actually printed out bank statements and started circling payment anomalies with a red Sharpie like it was 2003. Blake sat at the head of the table, staring at a projected spreadsheet that looked like a crime scene. Error codes, vendor complaints, chargebacks, threats of litigation. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The system passed all our internal checks." That's when the CTO finally spoke. He'd been quiet for most of the chaos, just watching, listening. His voice was low but clear. "We had a document. Melissa sent it before she left, titled for when it breaks." Everyone froze. Blake turned in his chair, blinking. "What?" The CTO stood up, opened his laptop, and typed. Within seconds, the file appeared on the room's shared display. Breakless Nova full zip. The CTO looked at Blake. "You knew she was compiling risk documentation, right?" Blake's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Yeah, but I mean she was just being overly cautious." The CTO clicked open the archive. Folder by folder, the silence grew heavier. Inside were flagged risks, compliance deviations, spec change logs, email screenshots, Git commit notes, all tied together in a master index labeled Root Cause Traceback Guide. Melissa hadn't just left them a paper trail, she left them the damn map. It was a forensic masterpiece, a digital breadcrumb trail that showed exactly how each decision, each ignored warning, each future problem Blake brushed aside, led directly to the catastrophic rollout they were now drowning in. At one point, someone from legal whispered, "This would have prevented all of it." The CTO didn't answer. He just turned to the finance lead and said, "Use this. It's our only chance of untangling this before quarterly filings." Todd tried to say something about trust and evolving teams, but it came out like wet paper. Melissa, for her part, didn't know any of this was happening yet. She was 2 states away, sipping coffee on a back porch, watching birds squabble over a feeder. Her phone buzzed once, an email from a former coworker. No subject, just a screenshot of the Nova meltdown in full display. The email caption read, "They finally opened the box." Melissa smiled, just once. They would clean up the mess. Eventually, maybe. But every fix, every recovery step, every damn ticket they triaged that week, it started with her file. Vindication didn't always come with applause. Sometimes it came in the form of a ZIP file so thorough it made a room full of executives realize just how badly they'd fumbled the ball. And Melissa, she hadn't even broken a sweat. The email came through just before noon. Clean subject line. No fluff. No assistant. No hope you're well. Just from CEO at CompanyCom subject. Nova documentation request for context. Melissa read it twice, then set her coffee down and exhaled through her nose. She hadn't heard from anyone on the executive team directly, not once in 4 years, not when she'd saved the billing system from collapsing in 2021, not when she patched a client-crippling bug in less than 6 hours with nothing but a VPN and 2 cans of Monster. But now, it was, now he needed her. She clicked reply, happy to provide clarification. Please find the attached report with full historical context, including escalation records, deviations from approved protocols, and risk assessments as originally filed. Let me know if further detail is needed. The attachment, a 64-page PDF titled Nova Collapse Root Cause Matrix. It wasn't just a list of complaints. Melissa had written it like a case study, executive readable. Clean layout. 1 column for date, 1 for warning raised, 1 for response or lack thereof, and a final column marked consequences observed. It read less like a report and more like a slow-motion security camera footage of a train ignoring every signal before derailing into a firework warehouse. Each section was sourced. Each claim backed with timestamps, email trails, JIRA links, and annotated code changes. It even included 3 appendices, 1 for governance violations, 1 for unreviewed architectural changes, and 1 titled Quotes from Leadership, a lovingly curated list of direct lines from Todd and Blake like policies are just training wheels, and if it breaks, we'll just pivot. She sent the email. 10 minutes later, her phone rang, unknown number. She answered anyway. Melissa, this is the CEO. His voice was quiet, calculated, tone of a man trying to sound calm while holding a grenade he just realized is live. I've read the report, he said. It's damning. She let the pause hang for just a second, then answered evenly. It was predictable. Another pause. He coughed once, the way people do when they realize they're not the smartest person in the conversation. Why didn't anyone escalate this sooner, he asked. Melissa didn't laugh, but it was close. They did, she said. I did. Multiple times. Through every official channel. Risk reviews, steering meetings, email, Slack. I have the receipts. You probably saw most of them in Appendix B. He was quiet again. Then, carefully, what would you have done differently? She looked out the window. A hawk was circling above the tree line. I would have listened to the people who build the systems before replacing them with buzzwords, she said. I would have trusted caution over charisma. I would have made damn sure the guy presenting at the investor demo knew the difference between a discount and a surcharge. The silence on the other end was heavy. Finally, Todd's on leave. Blake's contract is under review. Melissa didn't respond. She wasn't fishing for an update. This wasn't closure. It was a footnote. We'd like to bring you in as an advisor, the CEO added quickly. Short term, help us rebuild. She smiled just slightly. Not out of malice, because the arc was so perfectly bent. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I've already started consulting. In fact, I'm onboarding a new client this week. A beat. May I ask who? There it was, the flicker of panic under the surface. She let him sit with it, just long enough, a company in your vertical, one of your top competitors, actually. And then she hung up, calm, composed, complete. He had her report. He had his reckoning. And she had her revenge, sharper than any lawsuit, quieter than any scandal. Just truth, printed in black and white, now stapled to the boardroom's memory forever. The boardroom was dead silent, save for the CFO's voice slicing through the air like a bone saw. And based on delayed vendor payments, corrective refund disbursements, and pending litigation, the projected Q2 loss tied to the Nova platform stands at $8.2 million. Someone cursed under their breath. Chairs creaked. Legal counsel scribbled furiously. The slide behind the CFO showed a neat little pie chart titled Impact Breakdown, but it might as well have read Blake's ego tax in Comic Sans. Todd sat near the edge of the table, lips pressed tight, fingers laced together like he was praying no one asked why he was still employed. His collar looked too small, or maybe his guilt too swollen. Blake was nowhere to be seen. The CEO stood, palms on the table, nodded at the screen at the front of the room. Let's review Appendix G, her final recommendations. He didn't have to clarify who her was. Everyone knew. Melissa's name was now its own language in the company, whispered in hallways, uttered with either reverence or regret. Her report had become scripture, her tone in the email headers as sharp as a scalpel. On screen, the PDF loaded. A voice, Melissa's, played over the speakers, a pre-recorded walkthrough. No drama, no gloating, just cool, surgical explanation. This section outlines the unauthorized spec deviations and the timeline of ignored warnings. Page 12 cross-references the billing logic rollback Blake approved without formal review. Please note, several of these changes directly violated internal governance procedures, adopted Q3 of last year. Todd shifted in his chair again. The CTO cleared his throat. Everything she flagged matched our postmortem logs. It's airtight. The legal advisor muttered, if she had kept a hard drive with this outside the company, she could have buried us. That's when the CEO clicked stop playback and said, she's joining us live. The screen flickered, and there she was, Melissa. Framed perfectly in soft daylight, bookshelf behind her, hair pulled back, and a look that said, I've already had my coffee and your excuses bore me. Melissa, the CEO said, voice stiff. We wanted to thank you formally. Your contribution, your documentation. Well, it's the only reason we're still operational. She nodded once. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because someone had to. Todd opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to redirect blame, but before he could speak, Melissa leaned forward. I also wanted to take a moment to share an update, she said smoothly. I've launched a consultancy, specializing in risk audits for growth stage tech companies. Focus on identifying systems in danger of collapse due to mismanagement or nepotism. She let that hang a second longer than necessary. Our first client, she continued, just signed a 12-month engagement. They're in your market. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, they've taken 3 of your former clients this quarter. Todd blinked like someone smacked the back of his head with a dictionary. The CEO didn't flinch. He just nodded. And what's the name of your firm? He asked. Melissa smiled, cold and professional. Predictable outcomes. Silence, perfect, brutal silence. Then the CEO turned to the board and said, without irony, effective immediately, Melissa's emails are now required reading for all new project managers. She gave a courteous nod, then reached forward, clicked something on her end, and the call ended, just like that. The last word spoken wasn't hers, it was written on a PDF that still sat on the projector screen. Page 64, footer. Failure isn't a surprise when no one reads the warnings. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.